We are, as we just said, beginning chapter 42. Now, chapter 42 follows chapter 41. There's obviously a connection. Last chapter, we discussed what we need to do, a lot of work we need to do, starting with developing this foundational fear, awe, respect of God, with contemplation, with understanding how he fills the world, how he focuses on me. And now we're going to learn how we have the spiritual power to do all that. How are we so powerful that we can do everything we discussed in chapter 41? So looking inside, chapter 42. That which we discussed above. This is actually the first of the 5 intentions. It's very interesting because you think the Rebbe would go to the last idea of the previous chapter. Seemingly, there was going to the first. We discussed the intention of basic foundational fear and awe of God, and then avodah, service, then love, then dedicating what you're doing for all Jewish people, and then self-sacrifice. And now we're going all the way back and saying, how are we able to do this? And most specifically, who are we? How do we have the power to create this type of relationship with God, this type of fear of God? Yuvad hete, we can understand it very well. That which it states in the Talmud, al pasuk, on the verse, Va'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mimach, ki im li yiras havai Elokecha. This is a famous verse on which there's a famous question answer of the Talmud. So the verse, this is in Deuteronomy, in Dvarim. And what does God say here? Now, Yisrael, the Jewish people, what does God ask from you? Only to fear him. That's the verse. God's asking so much from you, only to fear him. So on this, the Talmud asks the same question we're wondering. Is fearing God such a small thing? Just a small change. All God's asking is for you to fear him. And the Talmud says, what are you talking about? Fearing God is huge. Fearing God isn't small at all. So, obvious question. I mean, I also have that question. It's a very interesting answer the Talmud gives. What does the Talmud say? Oh, for Moishe, it's a small thing. And we're like, so how does that? Again, the verse said, Jewish people, what's asking from you? Oh, him. And we're like, only? So the Talmud says that question for us. Is fearing God such a small thing? That's not an only, that's a huge thing. And the Talmud responds, well, for Moses, it's a small thing. So we're like, how does that help? So what? It's not Moses. We're not worried about his relationship with God. We're not worried about him developing his fear of God. He's fine. We're talking about ourselves. As the Rebbe states, seemingly ain't a move on. This doesn't help us. This is not understandable. Hatirus, this answer. Because if you look at the verse says, Va'ata Yisrael, and now Yisrael, Jew. What is God asking from you? What does God want from you? So for me to say, well, for Moses, it's a small thing, what does that do with anything? How does that help? I'm not wondering what God's demanding from Moses, from Moshe. I know that relationship is fine. It's what's God asking from me. So what's going on here? So the Rebbe explains, yes, fearing God does not seem a small thing. And yes, God is saying, it's a small thing. How is God saying it's a small thing? Because for Moishe, for Moses, it's a small thing. Well, how does that help us? Because every one of us has this aspect of Moishe, of Moses inside. And because of that energy of Moishe inside the soul of each one of us, we can also do it. So it says, what is God asking from you? There's this aspect of Moses, his dimension, his ability, that's from you. That's what we're talking about. Meaning, we're not talking about Moses in a vacuum. Moshe and his relationship with God. That's like way beyond anything we talk about. But how Moses is affecting each of our souls, that's the me'imach, that's the from you, from the Moses inside of you, that truly makes it so accessible to have this type of relationship with God. As the Rebbe is going to continue and explain, but the matter is, Because the Rebbe just had a question, like, how does that help? So what if it's small for Moses? What is that going to do with anything? Ki kol nefesh v'nefesh mibeis Yisrael. Because every soul, every single Jew, it doesn't make a difference who you are. It doesn't make a difference how much or little you do, how much or little you know. Your lineage, irrelevant. Every single Jew, by virtue of soul, has in the core energy of your soul a power of Moses. It says about Moses, it says about Moshe. It says in the Zohar, the foundational seminal work of Kabbalah, of the esoteric dimension of Torah, written beginning in the 2nd century with Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, is Pashtusa de Moishe b'chol dara v'dara, which means the reflection, the extension, the ray of Moshe, Moses, is in every single generation. He passed away some 3,300 years ago, but he's still here today. Now, when we look at this saying of the Zohar, the extension of Moses is in every generation, we understand this expression on 3 levels. On one level, this means that every generation has a Moses. In every generation, there's one person, the most perfect person, the ultimate leader, the Moses of that generation. And that leader is Moses. He actually contains within himself the soul power of Moses. Moses is in every generation. His name in our generation could be Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name could be Rashi, Rambam. Previous generations, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Whatever the name is, the leader of the generation contains the energy of Moshe. He is very literally Moshe. He has Moshe's soul in its entirety inside of him. That's the ultimate expression of the extension of Moses is in every generation. But there's another level, a smaller level. Not entire, totally this person possesses the soul of Moses, but he has from the powers of Moses. And that is true for every leader within a generation, meaning there's the one leader of the generation, as the verse says, Tzaddik Yesod Olam, the Tzaddik, the ultimately righteous individual, who is the foundation of the world. That's in the singular, we're talking about one person. But then there are leaders of every generation. Within every generation, there are many people that help, that guide, that lead the Jewish people. Every true leader contains an aspect of the soul of Moses, meaning Moses was like the leader of the Jewish people. It wasn't a mold. It's one. We can't copy it. Rather, his energy continues. So his energy continues in the leader. That ultimate leader of the generation is Moses. He contains the totality of the soul of Moses. And every other leader, not with a capital L, with a small l, every other true Torah leader contains from the energies of Moses. That's how he's a leader, because Moses is the only leader. So he contains from Moses' energy. And additionally, like level 3 of what this saying of the Zohar means is the extension of Moses in every generation, every single Jew contains within himself from the soul of Moses. How is that possible? Every single Jew? Now there's 15 million of us. And there was a generation before us, and a generation before us, and a generation before us. As we said, it's some 3,300 years since Moses was here. Every single Jew, and the Rebbe says, yes, every single Jew. Why? Because Moses is the shepherd of the Jewish people. As the Rebbe is going to reference, there are 7 shepherds of the Jewish people. We know them. We call them our ushpizin, the guests that come and visit us to our sukkah. Literally come. Every single day of the holiday of Sukkot, literally we have the energy of these 7 guests. Who are they? Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abram, Isaac, Jacob, Moshe, Aaron, Moses and Aaron, David and Yosef, David and Joseph. Those are the 7 guests that come to all of our sukkahs for the duration of the holiday, because those are the 7 shepherds of the Jewish people. What does a shepherd do? A shepherd tends the flock, making sure the flock has food and water and all of its needs met. So these 7 shepherds spiritually are tending us, are nurturing us. They're feeding us from their main attribute of God. Like we know classically, Abraham, he was the embodiment of God's kindness. And Yitzchak, Isaac, of God's judgment. And Jacob, of God's beauty, balance, harmony, truth. So I and you and every Jew that ever has lived is being fed by Abraham, that we should also have, by Yitzchak, that we should also have discrimination and discernment and the ability to make healthy boundaries, by Yaakov, that we should also have truth and balance and Torah, and by Moishe, what is Moshe's trait that he's feeding us? Da'as. We think of God's 10 attributes. There are 3 intellectual and 7 emotional. So Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the primary emotional attributes. Moshe is, so to speak, higher. He's already in the intellectual attributes. Just to remind a little bit how the intellect works by God and by us, so we can understand what Moses is doing for us. The first level of divine intellect in our soul, mirroring God's divine attributes, divine intellectual attributes, is Chachma. Chachma is a seminal wisdom, that flash of understanding, which if you don't catch it, it's gone. It's a flash, which then becomes articulated, thought out, developed, understood, fleshed out, broken down into pieces, put back together, analyzed, all this stuff in Bina. So Chacham is the core, and Bina is the development of that core. Okay, so we're done. No, we're not done. There's a third aspect of intellect, of godly intellect, how God's divine energies work and how our soul powers work, which means how we work. What's the third aspect after Chachma and Bina? Da'as. What's Da'as? Da'as, when we translate as knowledge. Da'as in the Kabbalistic model means connectivity, based on the first time we see the root of this in Torah, when it speaks about Adam Yodes Chava, and Adam knew Chava, Eve, which is the refined way of saying they fused, they connected, they had relationships, they became one. Right. So that's the source where we see for the first time this word da'as. So from there we derive that da'as doesn't mean to know intellectually. It means to connect to the knowledge. We might call it to internalize the knowledge. And that is a key part of our intellectual development, because only when you become one can emotions flow. Remember, we just said this a few minutes ago. We are trying to understand how we have the ability to do what the Alter Rebbe told us to do in the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, the Alter Rebbe told us to contemplate some basic ideas to evoke a true awareness and fear, submission, nullification, respect for God. Okay, we know the protocol. We know the thoughts to think. But why does it work? Why, when I'm thinking those thoughts, does this tremendous power, this force of fear and awe of God develop? We're being told because of Moses, because of the Moshe inside of us. And what is the trait of Moshe that we all now have through him? Da'as, connectivity. Connectivity to that which our intellect understands. So if I think something, if I'm thinking a godly thought, it's not abstract. It's not remote. It's not theology. It's not philosophy. I'm integrating it. I'm becoming one with that idea, courtesy of the Moses inside of me, because that was his trait. So he's giving it so it could be my trait. So when I become one, well, the natural result is a feeling. If I'm just objectively thinking about the power of God, the kindness of God, the grandeur of God, the infinity of God, it's philosophy, it's theology. But that's not how a Jew thinks. No Jew thinks that way, because every single Jew is part of this concept proclaimed in the Zohar, that extension of Moses is in every generation. So every single Jew, when we truly think into and understand godly concepts, there's a click, there's a oneness, there's a connectivity between me and that idea. And when I'm living the idea, when I'm feeling the intellectual concept, that's how my feelings for God emerge. So because of the Moses inside of me, truly, as the verse says, what's the big deal? All God wants from you, from the Moses inside of you, is to fear him. Well, now I can. The matter is, every soul has an aspect of Moshe, of Moses. Because Moshe is one of the 7 shepherds, as we said, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David, one of the 7 shepherds that are constantly feeding the Jewish people with the power of God they embody. Like Abraham is the ultimate embodiment of God's kindness. It doesn't mean he didn't have strength in him. It doesn't mean he didn't have harmony and balance and truth. It doesn't mean he didn't have connectivity. Of course, he had all of these. He had the complete panorama. He's Abraham. But chesed, kindness, that was him. That was his embodiment of God's trait. So each one of these 7 had something they embodied, and that thing is what they're feeding as a shepherd tends the flock. They're tending the flock of the Jewish people, us, and giving us from themselves. That draw down vitality and godliness to the totality of souls of the Jewish people. I'm just going to stop for a second on these words, because for those that know the stories around Tanya, and of course, the 19th of Kislev is coming up this Shabbos, when we recommit to Hasidus, to the ways of Hasidus, to the study of Hasidus, of course, to Tanya. So, as many people probably heard at some point in their life, to bring out the specialness of Tanya, how every word, how every letter is so precise. The story is told that the Alter Rebbe once spent about 6 weeks contemplating a Vav. One letter, Vav. Vav, before a word, means and. And he spent 6 weeks saying, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Well, in the end, he said yes. And it's right here, what I just read. Look at the words again. Just again, I'm decontextualizing what we're talking about just to appreciate the preciousness of Tanya. Very timely. And these are the words. Behind that story, many of you might know. Kihi Mishiva Royim. Moshe is one of the 7 shepherds. Hamamshichim, that draw down. Chayus ve'elokus. That Vav, vitality and godliness. So the Alter Rebbe spent 6 weeks thinking about that Vav. Should he say Chayus Elokus, a godly vitality, or should he say Chayus ve'elokus, vitality and godliness? As we see, he said Chayus ve'elokus, Chayus, vitality, which means in this context here, it means the emotions, the love and fear of God. And godliness means in this context, nullification to God. Our ability to nullify ourselves, to be bottle and subservient to God. So this is the spot. And this again is how precious, we could look and think sometimes there's a lot of wordage. Every word, every letter, there's something behind it. So the Rebbe is saying, going back to what we're talking about, that was a parenthetical, but I thought significant point, that Moshe is a shepherd. He feeds us his power. He feeds us da'as, godly ability to connect to the concept. He's drawing down chayas. He's drawing down so that we have the ability to have this love and fear of God. He's drawing down elokus. He's drawing down our ability to be nullified to God. Because when we have da'as, when we have connectivity, so the love flows and the fear flows and the nullification. Shalachin, that therefore, Nikroim b'shem right. That's why we call them shepherds. We don't call these people the leaders of the Jewish people, which of course they were. We don't say the leaders of the Jewish people. We call them shepherds very specifically. Like, it's a nice archaic word, and it, we feel sort of a warm, fuzzy connection, a shepherd, a flock, us and our leader. I'm saying It's not meant as a nice fuzzy word. It's meant as a very precise word. They are literally shepherds because they tend to us. They feed us. They feed us their traits. So in general, as we said, we've got these 7 shepherds: Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. But from all of them, Moshe is the shepherd. Moishe Rabbeinu Shalom, who klolus kula. And Moshe, he's the totality of all the shepherds. He's the ultimate shepherd. V'nikra Raya Mehemna. He's called the faithful shepherd. Now that term Raya Mehemna, you might know that term as a section of Zohar, which it is, referring to Moshe. Raya Mehemna, on the simple literal level, which is true, is the faithful shepherd. Moses was the most ultimately faithful shepherd of the Jews ever. He's still our faithful shepherd. He's still tending us. He is embodied in every ultimate leader of the generation. If we say Nasi, the Sidarenu, the Nasi of our generation, the leader, the spiritual leader of our generation, the Tzaddik Yesod Olam, the ultimate righteous leader of our generation, that's Moshe. He might be called Rashi, he might be called Rambam, he might be called Rebbe. It's Moshe. He's the ultimate and only leader of the generation. He's a very faithful shepherd. He's been tending us for 3,300 some years. And that's the literal meaning, and it's absolutely true. On a deeper level, the term faithful shepherd means one who shepherds us faith. Raya, this is Aramaic, the term Raya Mehemna. In Hebrew, it probably be translated as Ro'eh Ne'eman. A Ro'eh, he's the shepherd. He's tending us, feeding us. Faith, Emunah. He's feeding our faith. It's very interesting. The last Hasidic discourse we merited to be given by hand from Lubavitcher Rebbe was exactly developing this concept. It's not the only place in Hasidus where the concept is developed, but it was the last discourse we received by hand from the Rebbe, from Katan, Tafshin and Beis, that Moses, the Moshe, within any leader, it's the Moshe of the generation. His job is to make sure we have a faith in God. And you could say, wait a minute, what do I need him to do that for? What does the Talmud say about us? We're very important people. We're very spiritual people, very holy people. Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. That's what the Talmud says about the Jewish people, and it's absolutely true. Translation, believers, the sons of believers, the children of believers. Every single Jew is innately a believer in God. Very important for us to remember, because some Jews try to pretend they're not. And whenever I'm speaking with someone, you're Jewish, your mother was Jewish, we're not going to talk about belief. You believe. Let's move on past that point. You know it or not, I know. You believe in God. Every Jew believes. So what do I need Moses, or whoever is the current Moses, to feed my faith? I'm a Jew. I believe. True. But as Jews believe, our belief could be what we call Kabbalistically encompassing, meaning like remote, meaning like it doesn't affect us. You know, the Talmud's example of this, the classical example, not mine, the Talmud's, is the thief who, as he's going to steal, prays to God that he should be successful. He should have a successful night. He should earn a lot of money. He should steal a lot of expensive things. So if you so much believe in God, what are you stealing for? And if you don't believe in God and that's why you steal, what are you praying for? So the answer is no. He's a Jew. He believes in God. Does the belief change his actions? Does the belief make him do something contrary to what he wants to do? Does the belief make him uncomfortable? That's a pretty separate step. But he believes. All Jews believe. So what do we need a Moshe for? Again, whoever the Moshe is, if it's Rashi, if it's Rambam, if it's the Rebbe, what do we need a Moshe for? To help us internalize that faith. Faith we all have. Belief we all have. But belief that doesn't impact our actions is not getting us anywhere. Not much. So the job of the Moshe in the Hasidic discourse, the Rebbe was talking about a Moshe called Mordechai, right? He discusses Moshe and Mordechai and the leader of the generation. So if it's Moshe, if it's Mordechai, if it's the leader of the generation, he's dealing with good merchandise, Jews, people that naturally believe. But then comes along the Moshe, the Mordechai, the Rashi, the Rebbe. And he says, okay, now I've got to nurture that faith. That your faith becomes internalized. and you act differently because of it. All 7 are shepherds: Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. Moshe is the ultimate shepherd. And as an ultimate shepherd, he's the faithful shepherd. And as a faithful shepherd, he's feeding us faith. Additionally, he's also feeding us das. So Moshe is feeding us faith. He's nurturing our faith. He's helping us that our faith becomes internalized, which means we act because of it. We do things differently because of it. And he's feeding us das. He's feeding us a connectivity to God so that when we learn something about God, we can live it. And when we live what we learn, when we become one with what we learn, we have naturally a feeling for God. And that's the point we're going in this chapter, piggybacking from everything we learned last chapter. Gehainu, mean to say. In the context here, we're focusing on das. Again, not at all minimizing Moshe feeding our faith in God. It's critically important. And as I said, it is the last Hasidic discourse we received from the Rebbe. This point, so it's a critical point. In the context here, we're focusing on Moshe feeding us da'as because we want to talk about who are we? How can we feel this fear and love of God? We're nothing. Well, we might be nothing, but we got really strong shepherds feeding us and bringing us to very exalted heights. It's very interesting because from a different perspective, we speak of having power from 5 ultimate souls. Here we're talking about having power from 7. There's some overlap, but not complete. The 5 ultimate souls are David, as here he's one of our shepherds. Eliyahu, who's not. Moshe, who is. Adam Harishon, who's not. And Mashiach, who's not. Meaning, we have 5 levels of soul called Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. The core of every level is the soul energy of the tzaddik, of that ultimate Jew, not just ultimate generationally, or ultimate within the past few hundred years, ultimate from all times, the ultimate Jew who embodied that level. Meaning there's 5 levels, and each level has one Jew, one tzaddik, one unbelievable soul who was the ultimate embodiment of that level. And as such, his core energy is in the core of each of our souls on each of those levels. So my most foundational level of soul, Nefesh, King David HaMelech, was the embodiment of Nefesh, and he's one of our shepherds. My next level of soul, Ruach, Elijah, Eliyahu Navi, is the embodiment of Ruach. My third level of soul, Neshama, Moshe. He's the embodiment of Neshama. He's inside my Neshama. He's the core of my Neshama. The next level, Chaya, the first man, Adam Harishon, Adam. People that don't know give Adam like a bad rap. They don't know how holy he was. He was almost the holiest soul of all times. That holy. 4th highest level of soul, he's the embodiment of it. And he's in the core of every Jew on that level of soul. And my highest level of soul, Yechida, Mashiach himself. He's the core, he's feeding the core of every Jew under Yechida, which is why we say to reveal Mashiach, reveal your own Mashiach inside self. Access your own Yechida energy. Why is your Yechida energy Mashiach? Because Mashiach is the core of your Yechida. So when you access your Yechida, you're really accessing him. So on one hand, we are so powerful. Not only we, obviously, great, wonderful people that come and learn Tanya at night. My gosh, amazing. Every single Jew is so powerful. Every single Jew of all times has inside of themselves King David, Eliyahu, Elijah, Moses, Moshe, Adam Harishon, Adam, and Mashiach. Literally, we all have it. And therefore we all have so much power. And additionally, we're saying here, we have 7 shepherds that are feeding us their power. As we said, David and Moses overlap. But then we also have Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Aaron and Yosef. And those 5 are also feeding us. So every Jew is constantly being fed from all these directions, all of this godly energy. God put a lot on our shoulders. In case you don't think so, I don't know, but I think so. We all have so much we're required to do, so many challenges, so many things we contend with. We know that. But we also have tremendous spiritual power to succeed, to overcome, to prevail, to turn over worlds. Look at the greatest of the great of previous generations. They're literally feeding us. Each one of us. Literally, can you imagine what a deep, personal, intimate relationship you have with Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Aaron and Moishe and Yosef and David and Eliyahu and Adam Arishon and Mashiach? If you ever feel overwhelmed or weak, tell your evil inclination to take a hike. We are very, very, very powerful. So, continuing. So, as a faithful shepherd, so Moshe feeds our faith and feeds our da'as, our connectivity, our ability to become one with that which we learn and study, from which we can really have a feeling, an emotional response, which is, of course, what we're striving for. Leida es havaya, to know God, but again, it doesn't mean to know knowledge. It means to become one with. It's very interesting. Like the protagonist of Moshe was Pharaoh. And what did he say about God? Lo yadati. That's the opposite. Moshe, he's feeding us das, and Pharaoh says, I don't know. I don't know God. I don't have das. On the side of evil, maybe you can learn. But don't worry, you're not going to connect to the idea anyway. There's no das. Moshe say, no. We have das. We know. We connect. We become one with. Kol echad, our ability to become one with God through studying and internalizing and integrating and having a feeling is not the same. Each one of us has a different ability, but we all have the ability to do this because it's predicated on a few factors. How much his soul can grasp. How high is his soul rooted? And how much is he absorbing from Moses? So every soul is different. There's a few factors here. How much your soul can absorb. How high spiritually is your soul? How much is your soul getting from what Moses is feeding it? Moses is feeding to all of us. Some of us have more broad open mouths. Some of us can take more in. Some of us is getting more from what the shepherd's giving to the flock. That makes a big difference in how much you're going to connect, and therefore how deeply you will become one with what you're learning, and therefore have an emotional response. How high is Moses? I'm telling you, who feeds you das. How come he feeds you das? Because Moses is enrooted in God's das. The same way Abraham is an embodiment of God's kindness. He's enrooted in God's kindness. Moshe is enrooted. He's an embodiment. He is the level of das, of Atzilus. Actually, much higher than Chesed, a whole level beyond. Sheb Eser Sfiros Atzilus. So he is from the 10 attributes of Atzilus. Hamiyuchados v'ma'atzilam baruchu. And the 10 attributes of Atzilus are one with the emanator of Atzilus. Atzilus is emanation. Atzilus is a natural emanation from God. So he's the Ma'atzil. He's the source of the emanation. Shehu v'da'aso echad. How close is Das with God? Hu v'da'aso echad. He and his Das is one. As Maimonides says, he is Das. So the Rebbe here is like upping the point even more. The Rebbe is saying, you have so much power. You think you're a nothing. You think you're a nobody. That's what your Yetzer Hara, that's what your evil inclination wants you to think. You're huge. You're huge because you have these 7 huge tzaddikim that are fearing you, and they're huge. So you might not think you're small, but you acknowledge they're huge, and they're feeding you. So that makes you huge, plus the 5 I discussed. So you got a lot of things that are making you huge. And right now we're focusing on Moshe and how huge he is. Why do I know how huge he is? Because that's how huge I can be. Because he's feeding me. I'm small. He's huge. They say, like the Rebbe said, the person's small, but the chair is big. We're small, but what's feeding us is huge. And therefore, we're huge. So how huge is Moshe? And of course, we know, what do you mean? He split the sea and was in heaven 120 days and brought down the manna. We know all that. But here we're talking in terms of his spiritual source. So as we're saying here, the spiritual source of Moshe is da'as, God's da'as, God's knowledge, God's awareness, God's connectivity. Now, da'as is the 3rd of the 10 traits of God. Chachma, Bina, da'as. After comes Chesed, Abraham's, Gevura, Yitzchak's, Tiferes, Yaakov. Moshe's da'as. Da'as in what spiritual dimension? For all of these, we mean the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is the first of the 4 worlds in our solar system, in the worlds of Tikkun, in Seder Hishtalshelus. And Atzilus is so close to God, we're told you can't see separation. That's why it's called Atzilus. Atzilus is from the root word Eitzel, next to God, or like Etzal, just natural flow, natural evolution, like not created, made, that's really a separation. No, just a natural Etzal, a natural flow, a natural emanation from God himself. So every one of the attributes of Atzilus are one with God. That's the whole idea of Atzilus. As it says Kabbalistically, God is one with the lights, God is one with the vessels, Atzilus, God, one, it's all one package deal. So that's true for all 10 attributes of Atzilus. They are absolutely, each one of them, one with God. So if you're receiving from Moshe, and Moshe is feeding you his trait of das of Atzilus, you're one with das of Atzilus. That's what's going on inside of you. And das of Atzilus is one with God himself. The emanation and the emanator. Das of Atzilus, infinity of God. You, das of Atzilus, infinity of God. You and God, absolutely one. Then the Rebbe said, it's even more than that. Because that's true for every one of the 10 attributes of Atzilus. God is absolutely one with kindness, and God is absolutely one with Gevura, with restraint, and God is absolutely one with the harmony and beauty of Tiferes. God's one with every dimension in Atzilus. But Das has a special, even deeper than that, oneness with God. Hu v'daso echad. He and his Das are one. Well, he and his kindness is one also. Yeah, but this is even deeper. And that's why Maimonides, first of all, when he speaks about believing in God, he says, Leda, we need Das to literally have this belief. Again, we need this connectivity to really, well, I'm a Jew, I naturally believe. Yeah, but you need Das to make it real, as we're saying. More than that, when Maimonides is talking about God at his highest level within the spiritual worlds, he describes God as Hu Amada, Hu Yodea, Hu Yadua. If you know a little Hebrew, you'll notice that each one of those words, 3 words, has the same root. And the root is Das. Das, Das, Das. That is how Maimonides is describing God in his highest dimension within creation. Hu Amada, Hu Yodea, Hu Yadua. He's the Mada. He's the ability to know. Yodea, the knower. Yadua, that which is known. But there's lots of words in Hebrew for know. Languages develop, you could say, organically from the culture of the people that speak the language. So in the Jewish language, there's a lot of words for knowledge, because that's obviously something very precious and significant to the Jewish people. So Maimonides chose to use that root word das, mada, yodea, yadua. Could have used a different word to say the exact same thing. Maskil, maven. There's plenty of other words. No, it wasn't random. Maimonides is not random. I'm talking about Das. I'm talking about God Das. Because God on his Das, that's the most intimate oneness of all of these 10 attributes. And we are fed that Das constantly. Moshe is constantly feeding me that level of connectivity to God. That level of Das of Atzilus, where God and Das is more one than he's one with everything else in Atzilus. And that more one, I have the ability to access. So again, when the verse said, Jewish people, you won't need to fear. We're like, whoa, that's a tall order. Not if you know what you're made of, right? Like Snapple, the best stuff on earth. We're the best stuff beyond earth. What are we made of? What are we being fed from? Take it a step deeper. What is God asking you? That very word, ma, what, relates deeply to Moshe. Moshe, when he was talking about himself, said, V'nachnu ma. What are we? We're nothing. What are we? The Talmud on that says that Moshe's nullification to God was deeper than Abraham's. Abraham said about himself, Anochi Ofer ve'ether, I'm dust and ashes. Pretty nullified. He was. But Moshe said about himself, V'nachnu ma. We're like, it's just a question mark. We're like, what? We're like nothing. So that term ma expresses the absolute nullification of Moses. Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imach. Ma. Because of this power of nullification, Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imach. God can ask from you to fear him. Because Moses is feeding that to us as well. We have his das, we have his ma, his nullification, we have the emunah, an internalization of our belief in God. All of this Moses is pouring into every single Jew. You know, like the superheroes, they're in disguise. They seem just like regular people, but underneath, every single Jew is that superhero. Every single Jew has so much power in him, from his soul, from these 7 shepherds, from the 5 leaders of all time that are the core energy of our soul. The Rebbe says, with all this power, of course you can do everything I'm talking about. Of course you can do all this spiritual work easily, naturally. You are so powerful. You don't feel powerful? Your inclination's doing a good job. It tries to make you feel weak and powerless, but you're very powerful.